What is Bigfoot's favourite type of warfare? Guerrilla warfare!
In the summer of 1780, nearly 81 years before the outbreak of the Civil War you learned about in school, the United States' first Civil War raged in the backcountry of the Carolinas between rebel patriots and loyalists in support of King George III. While patriot partisans like the swamp fox, Francis Marion, employed hit-and-run guerrilla tactics, the new American commander in the South, Nathanael Greene, made his army similarly elusive on a larger scale. Stay tuned for the War of the Carolinas on this episode of Bigfoot's Great American History Show. On August 19, 1780, 200 rebel partisans ambushed a loyalist camp at Musgrove Mill, South Carolina, killing 63 men while suffering only 4 losses of their own. Many of these loyalists had been en route to join British Major Patrick Ferguson, who was in the area raising a force of locals for a planned invasion of North Carolina. Following the raid, Ferguson entered into hot pursuit of the partisans responsible for it. The rebels escaped across the Appalachian Mountains into present-day Tennessee. There they were joined by partisans from surrounding areas, and in late September, roughly 600 of these so-called Overmountain men, along with a force of 400 militia from Virginia, passed back into North Carolina with the intent of confronting Ferguson's force. Catching wind of these movements, Ferguson retreated toward British General Charles Cornwallis in Charlotte. On October 6th, he and his men reached Kings Mountain, where they made camp. Alas, they ought to have pushed on toward Charlotte. By the time they heard the Patriots' battle cries the next afternoon, 900 fast-riding rebel partisans had already surrounded them. As was often the case in this Civil War of the Carolinas, the engagement was brutal and bloody. The Patriots continued to shoot even as Ferguson's men attempted to surrender. This in revenge for allegedly similar conduct by British Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton's force at the Battle of Waxhaws. Meanwhile, British hopes of rallying a loyalist force to tip the scales in the war were waning. As it was, Patriot irregulars were the ones raiding supply wagons, communication lines, and British garrisons now spread across South Carolina. The Patriot leaders responsible for these attacks have become the stuff of legend. William Davie, Andrew Pickens, Elijah Clarke, and perhaps most celebrated of all, Francis Marion. A native of South Carolina, Marion used guerrilla tactics to terrorize loyalists across the Carolinas, making surprise attacks and quick withdrawals. Better yet, especially for a cash-strapped Congress, Marion's men served without pay and supplied their own horses and weaponry. From the Battle of Black Mingo in September of 1780 to the Battle of Eutaw Springs in September of 1781, Marion served as a perpetual thorn in Cornwallis' side. Tarleton, sent to capture or kill Marion in November of 1780, allegedly said, "As for this old fox, the devil himself could not catch him." So, the legend of the swamp fox was born. Chastened after the debacle at the Battle of Camden, the American Congress finally assented to George Washington's choice for commander in the South. That choice was Nathanael Greene, who until then had been serving as Quartermaster General. Greene promptly split his force in two, sending Brigadier General Daniel Morgan westward across the Catawba River. With the garrison at 96 thus threatened, Cornwallis sent Tarleton in pursuit of Morgan's men across the South Carolina backcountry. So it was that on the evening of January 16, 1781, Morgan prepared to stand and fight his pursuers. His field of choice was not ideal, at least according to military textbooks. Hannah's Cowpens was a meadow well suited for cavalry, which Morgan largely lacked, and which Tarleton had in spades. Moreover, the broad river stood behind Morgan, making retreat impossible. As it was, he viewed this as a potential advantage. His troops would have no choice but to stand and fight. The next morning he formed 2 lines in front of a low hill in the center of the meadow, and a third on top of it. The sun had scarcely risen before an eager Tarleton sent his lines at these defenses. The American front line consisted of 150 sharpshooting skirmishers who promptly poured in rifle fire to harass the British advance. Meanwhile, Morgan had commanded his second line not to defend to the death, but rather to fire 2 volleys and then pull back. They did so, whereupon the British accepted the invitation to press forward. Arriving at the third and main line, however, the British attack stalled under heavy fire. So Tarleton called for his reserve, and here a stroke of good fortune served the Patriots well. Seeing the British reserve advancing on his right flank, American General John Eager Howard ordered that side of his line to wheel about. Unfortunately, his right was composed of inexperienced militia, and in the confusion of the battle began to withdraw instead. Howard, however, recognized that his men were not in a panic, and so informed Morgan. Morgan thus called for the troops to turn and stand their ground on the other side of the hill, hidden from view of the advancing British. The British, sensing a rout, pressed forward eagerly, only to be met by an unexpected American stand, followed by a bayonet charge. Tarleton's force fled in panic. Following flanking maneuvers by the cavalry in reserve and the militia that had earlier formed the second line, the Americans captured some 800 prisoners, 2 grasshopper cannons, and 800 muskets. Upon hearing of the loss at Cowpens, Cornwallis stripped down his column's baggage and fell into hot pursuit of Morgan's force. Greene, correctly guessing Cornwallis's aim, moved quickly to link up with the rest of his army. This accomplished, he proceeded to do what the Americans had done so well for the duration of the war. He ran. For nearly 2 months, he eluded a major engagement. Finally, on March 15th, at Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina, Greene resolved to make a stand. There, just as Morgan had done at Cowpens, Greene formed defenses along 3 lines. Just as Morgan had done at Cowpens, Greene instructed his front line to volley twice and then retreat. Yet, just as at Cowpens, the British demonstrated discipline and bravery as they pressed forward. And, unlike at Cowpens, the American front line seems to have panicked in earnest upon the British approach. Following a hotly contested clash with the second line in the woods beneath town, the British broke through to the third line below the courthouse. Here the momentum of the battle swung several times until Cornwallis ordered his artillery to fire grape over his own troops, then locked in close combat with the Americans. Men died on both sides, but it had the effect Cornwallis desired. The 2 sides separated, and the more experienced British reformed more effectively, whereupon Greene ordered the exhausted Americans to retreat. The British, however, were in no shape to pursue. "The spirit of our little army has evaporated a good deal," said General Charles O'Hara. And indeed, their losses had been severe. A quarter of their force, over 500 men, killed, wounded, or captured. In the end, Cornwallis made the fateful decision to leave the Carolinas and head north in search of the decisive victory the British so badly needed. So it was that at the beginning of August 1781, he began to put troops ashore in a bustling Virginia port known as Yorktown.